Like, you don't give up. You giving up? I could just see, they had to say it. I could see it in their eyes. I was like, dang it, man.
Roy Jones Jr. survived things that would have ended most men. The Olympic robbery. Millions of dollars gone. His memory fading punch by punch. But nothing prepared him for this. At his current age, life handed him a sentence he could not fight and a goodbye he never saw coming. This is where the story of the greatest boxer alive finally closes. The cost of everything. Roy Jones Jr. was sentenced as a young child to a cage he didn't choose. He was sentenced as a teenager by judges in a foreign country who had already decided the outcome before the final bell rang. He was sentenced by a weight cut that stole the most valuable thing an athlete can own, the body at its absolute peak. And he was sentenced by grief in a way that no championship belt, no Hall of Fame induction, no gold medal returned decades too late could ever fully address. Again and again, sentenced by forces larger than himself. This is that story. All of it. And it starts where most stories about Roy Jones Jr. never dare to begin. Not with the highlights, not with the titles, not with the prime that made him untouchable for years. It starts with the fall. Because the fall is where you find out what something is actually made of. After the knockout that changed everything, a single left hook early in a fight, the losses came in a cadence nobody had ever associated with this fighter. More losses followed. A knockout loss in a title fight. A decision loss in a trilogy. A loss to another champion. A first-round knockout loss. A lopsided decision loss to a man he had outboxed with a broken hand years earlier, now returning the favor with patient, suffocating precision. Another knockout loss. The record that had been nearly perfect was becoming something the people who loved him most did not want to look at directly. And Roy Jones Jr. kept going, not for fame, partly for money, though the financial troubles had accumulated severely. A large IRS debt. A bankruptcy filing. Properties auction. A net worth that had once been estimated very high, shrinking toward a fraction of that. But deeper than the money, it was the competitor in him. Something installed so early and so deeply that no amount of knockdowns could fully reach it. And beneath all of it, Roy Jones Jr. had been carrying a warning since he was a teenager. Since the day he walked into a gym and met a former world-class contender and watched what decades of being punched in the head had done to a man who used to be one of the most dangerous fighters alive. That man could barely speak. And what he told the teenager standing in front of him was the kind of thing that, when it comes from the right person at the right moment, carves itself into you permanently. Every blow you take to your head counts. Whether you're in training or whether you're in a real fight. They think training doesn't count. Yes, it does. That's where most of those guys get messed up at. Roy Jones Jr. knew exactly what those words meant in a way most people never could. His father had made him train many rounds a night minimum. Not pad work, full intensity movement and sparring every night, starting from a very young age. Before he ever fought for a world title, he had already absorbed more cumulative head trauma than most fighters take in entire careers. Eventually, that accumulation became impossible to ignore. He traveled for experimental treatment aimed at addressing balance issues he attributed to years of career damage. He has stated publicly that he believes his memory was damaged by his boxing career. He has turned the warning he received into advocacy. Carrying that message to gyms, to young fighters, to anyone who will listen, through the losses, the financial collapse, the health concerns, the ongoing public feud with another famous fighter that played out in heated social media exchanges and open challenges. Roy Jones Jr. remained standing. Battered, complicated, fully human, but standing. And then something happened that no amount of boxing training, no amount of mental toughness, no amount of daredevil numbness to pain could have prepared a man for. Roy Jones Jr.'s son, DeAndre, died by suicide. He was a young man. Days later, Roy Jones Jr. posted the rawest statement of his public life. Unfortunately, my son DeAndre took his life. I'm so thankful that God allowed me to come home the night before to spend the last night of his life with me and the family. I know a lot of people are going through tough times right now, but nothing is worth taking your own life. God gives it and God should be the one to take it away. Thank you for the love and support.
Lose a person like that is a very, very hard thing to do.
One of the first times he spoke about the loss at length, he described what the night before had actually looked like. He had been on the road for weeks. He was supposed to come home later. On a certain day, something told him to go home early. He didn't know why. He left, and late that night, a knock came at the door.
He got something for you. It's an 88 Olympic
88년도
gold. He won the gold. At the time, he had the gold, but he wants to give it back to you.
Talked for hours that night. Roy, his wife, and DeAndre, working through whatever weight had brought him to the door in the dark. Roy Jones Jr. has said that somewhere in those hours, he held his son in a way that felt like a goodbye he refused to name out loud. He told him to stay the night. DeAndre did. And when morning came, he was gone. The call came later. Roy and his wife drove. When he saw the police car near his son's truck, he already knew, because DeAndre, as he described it, was the kind of man who meant what he said, just like his father. In his grief, Roy Jones Jr. did something that the deepest parts of his upbringing had never taught him to do. He asked for help, not for himself, but for anyone else standing in the same place his son had stood. He linked the tragedy to the generational wounds he had inherited from his own father, and acknowledged without blame or performance that cycles of unspoken pain have a way of moving through families unless someone is brave enough to break them. And here is where the story refuses to end. Because at his current age, Roy Jones Jr. is not done. He has opened a new boxing gym, hosting a boot camp open to kids and adults alike. He joined the corner of a contender, who said that having a trainer who knows what it feels like to be exhausted in a fight, not just someone who watches, changes everything. He is confirmed for an expo in another city. Still present, still building, still here. And then there is the moment that might make you believe justice, even when it comes decades late, still comes.
That it belongs to
South Korean fighter who left a certain Olympics with a gold medal he privately knew wasn't his had spent nearly 4 decades carrying the weight of that verdict. He never turned professional. He became a high school teacher. He struggled for years under the shadow of a victory that felt like a condemnation, until one day he decided the only thing left to do was find Roy Jones Jr. and give it back. Through a translator, he said simply, "I had the gold medal, but I wanted to give it back to you. It belongs to you. This gold medal is your problem now." Wow. 2 letters, 1 word. Many years. But to understand what that gold medal really means, what it actually took to hold the weight of having it stolen and still become who he became, you have to go back to the night it was taken. You have to go back to the robbery and the rise. A specific date. A certain gymnasium in a certain city. The light middleweight gold medal bout at the Summer Olympics. On one side, a young South Korean fighter competing in front of his own country in a moment the entire host nation had built toward. On the other side, Roy Jones Jr., a teenager having already torn through 4 opponents without surrendering a single round, the clear, undisputed, universally acknowledged favorite. He had dismantled his way through the bracket without dropping a single round. A first-round knockout. A first-round knockout. 3 unanimous decisions. A semi-final so dominant that his opponent walked away with a broken nose. One of the keenest boxing minds in the business compared Jones's taunting hands-down style to a legend of the sport.
Win the goal off this, then I think there's something rotten in Korea, because that is absolutely one of the most dominant things.
That was a commentator calling it during the fight. Even in real time, before the scorecards were read, it was already obvious. The statistics confirmed what any set of eyes in that gymnasium already knew. Roy Jones Jr. landed many more punches than his opponent. 1 round, Jones outpunched him by a wide margin. Another round, in which his opponent received a standing count, Jones landed double. The final round, again a wide margin. And then the judges delivered their verdict, in favor of the Korean fighter. The referee raised the Korean fighter's hand. Then, in a detail reported by multiple witnesses in the decades since, the referee turned to Roy Jones Jr. and whispered, "I can't believe they're doing this to you." The Korean fighter reportedly apologized to Jones immediately after. A famous announcer, calling it live from the broadcast booth, said plainly that the Korean fighter had stolen the bout. And Roy Jones Jr. buried his face in a towel.
Yeah, all three that gave him the fight got banned.
3 judges who voted for the Korean fighter were suspended. 2 received lifetime bans from Olympic judging. An investigation documented that judges had been systematically wined and dined by local organizers. The scandal triggered the most significant reform in Olympic boxing history. The old scoring system was replaced with computerized electronic scoring, a direct institutional acknowledgement that the judging that night had been so catastrophically wrong that the entire scoring architecture of the sport needed to be rebuilt from scratch. Jones was awarded a trophy as the most outstanding boxer of the Games, making him the only silver medalist in Olympic boxing history to ever receive that honor. Recognition without a championship. The sport.
I was robbed. I felt like I was just going to stop boxing. I got back to Pensacola and saw the little kids that were on my boxing team.
Home thinking he might be done. And then he walked back into his hometown and looked at the faces of the children he had trained alongside.
You giving up? I could just see they had to say it. I could see in their
To say a word. He read the question in their eyes the same way he had spent his entire childhood reading every approaching signal of danger. And the weight of it, the responsibility of being the person a child looks at when the world tells them to surrender, was heavier than any left hook anyone could throw.
Now I gotta prove to y'all, not only was I the best at the Olympics, but I'm the best on the planet.
He turned professional and went many fights with many knockouts before his first fight went the distance. On a certain date, he stepped in front of one of the most technically refined fighters of his generation and outboxed him for many rounds with a broken hand, winning a world title on a unanimous decision. He vacated the title, jumped to another weight class, and met a man who had never been stopped as a professional. Roy Jones Jr. dismantled him. A major boxing publication called it the most dominant big fight in years. He made multiple defenses, including a stoppage in which a statistical system recorded the opponent landing 0 punches in one complete round, not a few, literally 0. He moved to another weight class, unified the division, and stood as the undisputed champion of that division, the first to unify it since a previous champion. He made a record number of unified title defenses at that weight. Nobody could touch him. And then he did something the sport had been told was impossible. Roy Jones Jr., who had started his career at a much lower weight, weighed in much higher and challenged the heavyweight champion, who weighed even more, many pounds heavier. He won by unanimous decision. He became the first former middleweight champion to win a heavyweight world title in over a century. The record was nearly perfect. He was everything the cage had built him to be. And then months later, he came back down to his previous weight. He cut the wee.
I would have given him a rematch. I could have been beat him that first fight, rode off into sunset.
First fight of a trilogy by majority decision, but he looked different, sluggish. Analysts noted it was the first time they had seen him absorb real punishment and take a black eye. The verdict that spread through the boxing community afterward was unanimous. The rapid, dramatic weight cut from heavyweight bulk back down had permanently burned through the fast-twitch muscle fibers his entire supernatural style was built upon. The reflexes, the evasion, the explosiveness, all of it quietly taxed by a scale and a calendar and the cost of doing what should have been impossible. He gave a rematch. Early in the fight, a single left hook landed. He went down. The first knockout loss of Roy Jones Jr.'s professional career. And the man who had been untouchable for years walked out of the ring something else entirely. But the question that nobody asks, the question that answers everything about how a man survives all of it, how a man absorbs that much punishment across that many decades and still ends up standing, goes back much further than that Olympics, much further than any boxing ring. It goes back to a certain city and a cage that was never made of rope. The cage born into a sentence. Picture the greatest boxer you've ever seen. Hands by his sides, head moving like smoke in a breeze. Every opponent he faces looks confused, like they're fighting a ghost who occasionally decides to hurt them. For many straight years, the #1 pound-for-pound fighter on the planet. World titles in multiple divisions. By almost every credible athletic measure, one of the 2 or 3 most physically gifted fighters who has ever lived. Now picture where all of that came from. Roy Levesta Jones Jr. was born in a certain city. The son of Roy Jones Sr., a decorated war veteran who earned a Bronze Star for rescuing a fellow soldier under fire, a former club fighter, a retired aircraft engineer, a hog farmer, and a man who ran his own local boxing gym. To the neighborhood kids, he trained for free, giving them structure, discipline, something to aim for. He was something close to a guardian angel. To his own son, the story was something entirely different. The abuse began when Jones Jr. was very young. Roy Sr. would get down on his knees, literally descend to his child's eye level, not to comfort him, but to slap him repeatedly. Open-handed, methodical slaps designed less to injure and more to humiliate, to destabilize, to break down any wall of comfort the boy might have constructed. He was very young. This was his training. He was forced to spar with opponents who were older, heavier, and specifically selected to be overwhelming. And when the pain and the tears came, there was no comfort waiting on the other side. Sometimes these sessions lasted many minutes straight, not drills. Many minutes of a grown man on his knees, tearing his little boy apart. Roy Sr. drew his entire philosophy directly from cockfighting. He raised fighting roosters. He understood the cage. He understood what it meant to condition something, to strip away its instinct for mercy and send it in with the singular directive of domination, win or die. He applied that same framework to his son. The boy received a shotgun for Christmas at a very young age and was driving heavy machinery by a similarly young age. Acts that reportedly caused his mother to feel faint with alarm. And when young Roy ran to his mother for comfort, Roy Sr. was ready with the words designed to close that door, too. "You're too much like your mother. You'll never do nothing if you're scared."